I've spent a lot of time thinking about the past few months, and it's crazy how much can change in such a short time. I was always a pretty straightforward guy, not someone who let emotions get the better of me. But somehow, Sarah always found a way to make me second-guess myself. It started innocently enough. We were high school sweethearts, and we ended up getting married right after college. The usual story, no red flags, no signs of anything unusual. Or at least, I didn't see it back then. It wasn't until about a year into our marriage that things started feeling off. Sarah was different, distant in ways I couldn't quite put my finger on. I'd ask her what was going on, and she'd give me some vague excuse. It wasn't that she was outright cruel, but there was this underlying tension between us. I'd try to make it better, plan dates, take her to places she liked, but nothing seemed to work. She always had this look on her face like she was somewhere else, mentally, even when we were together. It was frustrating, but I just chalked it up to life being stressful, work, all the usual excuses. One evening, everything changed. We were having dinner in our kitchen. She was quiet, as usual, pushing her food around her plate. I noticed a change in her body language, a stiffness in her shoulders that hadn't been there before. I asked her if she was okay, if something was bothering her. Her response was the same as always, "I'm fine." But this time, I felt like something was different. It wasn't the typical response. It was colder, more final. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing, and I kept going over everything in my head. The conversations, the looks, the small but noticeable things she'd say that made me feel like I was walking on eggshells. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, but she wasn't saying anything. It wasn't just the silence. It was the way it felt like she was keeping something from me, something that was slowly eroding whatever connection we had left. A few weeks later, I found out what it was. I walked into the living room after work one evening and caught her in the middle of a conversation on the phone. It was the way she looked at me when I walked in that hit me the hardest. Guilt, panic, and something else I couldn't quite place. She quickly hung up, a little too quickly. I'd never seen her act like that before. I asked her who it was, and she told me it was just a friend, someone from work. But something in her voice didn't sit right. It felt rehearsed, like she was trying to convince both me and herself that everything was normal. Over the next few days, the feeling only intensified. I began noticing little things. Her phone was always face down. She'd keep the door locked when she was in the bathroom. Things like that. I tried to ignore it, to give her the benefit of the doubt. But deep down, I knew something was off. My mind kept circling back to the phone call. I needed to know what was really going on, but I didn't know how to approach it without making things worse. Then, one evening, I did something I swore I would never do. I went through her phone. I hated myself for it, but I couldn't help it. I needed answers. When I saw the messages, it was like everything clicked into place. The texts, the casual tone, the way she'd flirt with him, her coworker, a guy named Adam. It wasn't a full-blown affair, but the emotional distance was there, the way she was letting someone else into a space that used to be mine. I felt sick to my stomach, like I'd just been hit by a truck. I confronted her that night. She denied everything at first, but when I showed her the texts, her face drained of color. She admitted to talking to him, but insisted it wasn't anything serious. That night, she broke down, telling me she was just feeling lonely and disconnected. The words she said, the way she cried, it almost made me feel bad for her. But in the pit of my stomach, I knew it wasn't just loneliness. It was something deeper, something I didn't understand at the time. We fought, like we always did when things started falling apart. But this fight felt different. There were no more lies, no more half-truths. Sarah admitted to feeling trapped, to resenting me for not being more attentive, for not reading the signs earlier. It was a twisted version of the blame game, but it didn't feel like she was blaming me entirely. It was as if she was trying to explain away her actions, justify them in some way that didn't quite add up. But the worst part wasn't the fighting or the blaming. It was the way she looked at me when she said it. Her eyes were empty, like she wasn't really seeing me anymore, like I wasn't the person she wanted in her life. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let her pull away from me any further, but I also wasn't going to let her drag me into some kind of emotional black hole. I tried to talk things out, to rebuild the trust, but deep down, I knew something had broken between us. It wasn't just the affair, or whatever it was with Adam. It was the way she had checked out of our marriage long before I realized it. I told her I needed space, time to think. The next few weeks were a blur of emotions. I tried to throw myself into work, tried to distract myself, but it didn't help. Everywhere I went, I kept thinking about her and Adam. I couldn't stop wondering if I had been too blind to see the signs, or if this was just how things always played out in the end. Then, just when I thought I was starting to move on, Sarah came back into my life in a way I wasn't expecting. It was a late evening when she called. Her voice was softer than usual, hesitant. She said she wanted to talk, really talk. I didn't know what to expect, but I agreed to meet her. When we sat down, I could tell she had been crying, her makeup smudged from the tears. And in that moment, I realized just how much I still cared about her, even though everything had fallen apart. She told me she had ended things with Adam. She said it wasn't easy, that it was hard to let go of someone who had made her feel alive again. But she said she was ready to fix things with me, that she realized how much she had hurt me. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that we could fix it, that we could go back to how things were before everything went wrong. But deep down, I wasn't sure if I could trust her again. I wasn't sure if I could forgive her, not completely. I left that meeting with more questions than answers. I wasn't sure where we went from there, or if we even could go anywhere. But one thing was clear. Whatever happened next, it was going to change everything. I spent the next few days replaying everything in my head. What she said, how she looked, the way her voice broke when she confessed to ending things with Adam. Part of me wanted to believe her, wanted to believe that this was just a rough patch and that we could fix it, but another part of me felt like I was setting myself up for more heartache. Trust, once broken, doesn't just magically heal, no matter how many apologies or promises are made. When we finally spoke again, it wasn't a calm conversation. It was more like two people standing at the edge of a cliff, trying to figure out whether to jump or turn around. She kept telling me how sorry she was, how she'd been so lost and confused, and how much she regretted the emotional distance that had pushed her to Adam in the first place. But there was something about her tone that felt rehearsed, like she was reading from a script. She was trying so hard to convince me, to convince herself that this was all just a bump in the road. I listened, but I couldn't help but wonder if she was just saying what I wanted to hear. We'd been down this road before, with little arguments here and there, promises to do better, but nothing ever seemed to change. I was tired of going in circles, of feeling like I was chasing a version of her that didn't really exist. The Sarah I married was someone who saw me as her equal, who wanted to build something together. But the Sarah I was dealing with now seemed different, like she was already living in a different world without me. I had to take a step back, think about things more clearly. I needed to find out whether there was still a chance for us, or if we were just clinging to a relationship that had already fallen apart. So, I did what I knew would help me make up my mind. I distanced myself. It wasn't a cold cutoff, but I didn't text or call her every day. I stopped asking how her day was, stopped checking in as much. It wasn't about being petty, it was about giving both of us some space to breathe. I started focusing on my own life again, even if it felt a little strange at first. I went out with friends more, picked up some old hobbies I'd let slide, and tried to remind myself of who I was before all of this happened. It was a little like waking up from a long, foggy dream. I remembered that I wasn't just Sarah's husband. I was also me. Someone with his own life and needs and boundaries. The more time passed, the more I realized that I couldn't ignore my own feelings anymore. It wasn't just about what Sarah did or didn't do. It was about the way I had lost myself in this relationship. I had given so much of myself, tried so hard to make things work, that I didn't know where I ended and she began. And now, after everything that had happened, I was left with this feeling of emptiness, like I had been living someone else's life for too long. I went back to our place one evening to pick up some clothes I'd left behind. When I walked through the door, the silence hit me first. It wasn't the comforting kind of silence, the kind that comes from being alone and content. It was the kind of silence that made everything feel hollow, like I was walking through a space that didn't belong to me anymore. Sarah wasn't home, which gave me a chance to look around, really look at the place we'd shared. It felt strange, like a house that was still in transition, still holding on to memories that no longer fit. There were pictures of us from vacations, wedding photos, all the little things that used to feel like milestones of our life together. But now, they just felt like relics of a past that was slipping away. I was about to head out when she walked in. She froze when she saw me standing there, her eyes wide with surprise. There was no anger, no confrontation, just a look of someone who didn't know how to fix what had already been broken. "Hey," she said quietly. Her voice had a softness to it, but it didn't feel comforting anymore. It felt distant, like she was trying to bridge a gap that was too wide for either of us to cross. "Hey," I replied, my voice flat. I didn't know what else to say. What was left to say? We had already gone through all the words, the apologies, the explanations. None of it changed what had happened. She stood there for a few seconds, her eyes darting between the floor and me. Finally, she spoke again. "I know things are messed up between us. I get it. But I don't know what else to do. I don't know how to make it right." I could see the frustration in her face, the way she was grasping for answers that weren't there. I wanted to be angry, to yell at her for what she had done, for how she had pulled away from me for so long. But for some reason, I didn't feel angry anymore. I felt tired. Tired of trying to fix something that felt broken beyond repair. "I don't know if it's about making things right anymore," I said quietly. "Maybe it's about figuring out if there's anything left to save. And I don't even know if that's possible." Her eyes filled with tears then, and I felt a pang of guilt in my chest. I didn't want to hurt her, but I couldn't deny what I was feeling. We had both done things to hurt each other, even if they were different kinds of hurts. She had emotionally checked out of our marriage, and I had been blind to it, so focused on what I thought was the ideal life that I missed the cracks forming under the surface. She took a shaky breath, wiping her eyes. "I just want you to understand that I didn't mean for things to get like this. I didn't want to hurt you. I know I did, but I didn't know how to talk to you anymore. It felt like you didn't see me anymore." I shook my head slowly, feeling the weight of her words settle on me. "And I didn't. I see that now." For a moment, we just stood there in silence, both of us processing everything that had been said. It wasn't the resolution I had expected, but it felt like a moment of clarity, like we were finally looking at the truth, even if it was too painful to face. Maybe we need to take a step back," I said after a long pause. "I can't fix this right now, Sarah. I need time. We both do." She nodded, a quiet understanding passing between us. It wasn't an easy decision, but it felt like the only one that made sense. Neither of us had the answers yet, but maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to move forward, separately, if that's what it took. It hurt to admit, but sometimes, distance was the only way to figure out if the love was still there, or if it was something that had already been lost. I left that evening with a heaviness in my chest, but with a sense of clarity I hadn't had before. It wasn't the end of our story, but it was the beginning of something new. Something neither of us knew we needed, but that both of us were too afraid to face until now. It had been a few weeks since that conversation with Sarah, and I spent most of that time in a kind of limbo. I was still living in the same apartment, still going through the motions of work and social life. But there was this lingering emptiness that followed me wherever I went. It wasn't just about Sarah anymore. It was about me too. About who I was without her, without the version of myself that I had been when we were happy together. I'd forgotten what it felt like to have time for myself, to do things that weren't tied to her or to us. But as much as I wanted to avoid it, I knew I had to face her again. I couldn't keep running from the reality of what was happening between us. I didn't want to, but I had to. The day I called her, I wasn't sure what I expected. I didn't even know what I was looking for. Closure? Answers? An explanation that would make everything make sense? Maybe all of it, but it didn't matter. The moment I heard her voice on the other end of the line, I knew we were still caught in the same tangled web of emotions. "Hey," Sarah said, her voice quieter than usual. There was an awkward pause. "You wanted to talk?" "Yeah," I replied, trying to sound casual. "I've been thinking a lot lately. About everything." She didn't say anything at first, but I could hear the hesitation in her breath. I couldn't blame her for it. We were both walking on eggshells, afraid to say the wrong thing, afraid to make everything worse. "I've been thinking too," she said finally. "And I know we need to figure this out, one way or another. I don't want to just keep pretending everything's fine. That was the thing about Sarah. She never liked to leave things unfinished. Even when the truth was too painful to acknowledge, she always tried to push it, to fix it, even if it meant making things worse. I used to admire that about her, how she never gave up on anything she cared about. But now, it just felt like she was desperately trying to glue together broken pieces that didn't belong together anymore. I don't know if I can keep doing this, I said, feeling the words come out of me before I even realized what I was saying. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. Sarah sighed on the other end. I know. I get it. You're hurt. And you have every right to be. There was a long pause, and then she added, but I don't want us to just walk away from everything. I don't want to give up on us. I love you, Ryan. I do. That word, love was heavy. Too heavy, like it was something she'd said a million times before but never really understood. I wasn't sure if I could hear it anymore, if I could trust it the way I had once trusted her words. It had become a word she used when it suited her, when she wanted to soften the blow of a mistake or make herself feel better about things she'd done wrong. And maybe I was being unfair, but it felt like the sincerity behind it was slipping away. I don't know if I believe that anymore, I said softly, even though it hurt to say it. I want to, but it's like I don't even know who you are anymore, Sarah. You've changed. I have changed, she replied, her voice breaking slightly, but I never stopped loving you. I don't know how to be the person I was before, because it's like I lost myself too. There it was again. The guilt, the helplessness, the constant pattern of her trying to make me feel bad for the way she treated me. I wanted to tell her that I wasn't responsible for her feelings anymore, that I couldn't be her savior, that I needed her to take responsibility for herself. But instead, I just stayed quiet, letting her words wash over me. I just want you to understand how hard this has been for me too, she continued. I never wanted to hurt you, Ryan, but somewhere along the way, I lost sight of us, of what we were. I got so caught up in myself that I didn't see the cracks forming. I didn't see that you were pulling away too. And there it was. She wasn't the only one who had changed. I had too. I'd allowed myself to get so lost in her world, to drown in her needs, that I stopped looking at my own. I stopped thinking about what I wanted. I had accepted the version of our marriage that had been offered to me, without questioning it. And now, it was too late to pretend it was okay. There was no going back to that version of us. Maybe we're just not meant to be the people we were, I said, my voice low. Maybe we've grown into different people, Sarah. And maybe that's not a bad thing. But it doesn't mean we're meant to keep forcing something that's already fallen apart. I don't want to lose you, she whispered. But I can't make you stay if you don't want to. I didn't have an answer for that. The truth was, I didn't know what I wanted anymore. I didn't know if I wanted to keep fighting for something that felt like it was beyond saving, or if I was ready to let go of the past and move on. I could hear the desperation in her voice, and it made everything more complicated, like a knot tightening in my chest. Part of me wanted to just hold her and tell her everything would be okay, but I knew I couldn't. I couldn't give her false hope when I wasn't sure of anything myself. I don't know, Sarah, I finally said. I need more time. I need to figure out if there's a way for us to fix this, or if we need to accept that it's over. I understand, she replied, the sadness in her voice almost too much to bear. Take all the time you need. I'll be here, whenever you're ready. And that was the hardest part. The knowing that I wasn't ready, that I wasn't sure if I would ever be. I wanted to fix everything, to make her feel better, to make myself feel better, but deep down, I knew that some things couldn't be fixed. Some things, once broken, stayed that way. The next few days felt even heavier than before. I went through the motions, but everything felt like it was moving in slow motion. I started questioning everything, our past, our future, the choices we had made, and whether any of it had been worth it. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for anymore. Was it an answer? A sign? A miracle that would tell me everything was okay? But I knew deep down that there wasn't going to be a miracle. No sudden realization that would make everything click into place. The only way forward was through the mess, through the confusion, and whatever came next, whether it was together or apart. And that, I realized, was the hardest part of all, letting go of the idea of what we had, and accepting what we were becoming. I spent the next few days mostly in my head, replaying every conversation Sarah and I had had, every decision, every action, trying to figure out where everything had gone wrong. But no matter how much I thought about it, I couldn't come up with any real answers. The problems between us weren't just one thing. They were a series of small, neglected things that had built up over time, like cracks in a foundation until the entire structure came crumbling down. The hardest part was trying to figure out if there was any way to fix it. Every time I thought I had an answer, it slipped through my fingers. I had this feeling that no matter what I did, it wouldn't be enough. The trust was gone, and trust was the foundation of everything. Without it, what was left? I met up with a couple of friends, trying to distract myself, but it didn't work. They asked about Sarah, about how I was doing, and I gave them the usual answers. We're figuring it out. It's complicated. I don't really know what's going on yet. I wasn't lying, but I wasn't telling the truth either. I wasn't ready to tell anyone the full story, the parts that hurt too much to admit even to myself. No one seemed to get it. They all had their own opinions on what I should do. But the thing was, none of them really knew what it was like to be inside my head, to live in the mess of uncertainty that had become my life. I remember one afternoon, sitting on the couch in my apartment, staring at the empty space where Sarah's things used to be. Her perfume bottle still sat on the dresser, her hairbrush in the bathroom, little reminders of her scattered around like ghosts. I didn't know if they were haunting me, or if I was holding on to them because I wasn't ready to let go. I couldn't bring myself to get rid of anything yet. It felt like erasing her completely, and I wasn't ready for that. It wasn't until I got a text from her that things really started moving again. Asterisk, I know you need space, but I think it's time we talked again. I don't know how much longer I can just wait. Asterisk, I hadn't responded right away. I sat there, phone in hand, knowing I had to make a choice. I could keep avoiding her, keep hiding behind this wall of silence, or I could face whatever came next. The problem was, I wasn't sure what that would look like. What if it just made everything worse? Still, I knew I couldn't keep putting it off. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine. I called her later that evening. Hey, Sarah said when she picked up. Her voice was soft, almost fragile. I wasn't sure if you'd call. I didn't know if I should, I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral. But, I guess we need to talk. There was a brief silence on the other end, and I could feel the weight of it between us. I've been doing a lot of thinking, she said, and I don't know what to say anymore. I just know that I can't keep pretending I don't care. But I also don't want to make things harder for you. I felt a lump in my throat. It had been so long since we'd spoken like this, like we were actually listening to each other instead of just talking past one another. The walls between us had been so thick for so long that it felt strange to even hear her like this again. Vulnerable. Honest. I missed it, even if it hurt. Sarah, I don't want to make this harder for you either, I said, my voice more vulnerable than I expected. But I don't know what to do anymore. I don't know how to fix this. I don't know if I even want to fix this. You're right. We've been pretending for a long time. She let out a shaky breath. I don't want to be the one who hurts you, Ryan. I don't. But I know I have, and I don't know if I can make that up to you. I don't know if you can either, I said honestly. It was harsh, but it was the truth. I don't even know if we can go back to how we were. I don't know if it's possible. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was filled with emotion. I don't want to go back to how we were. I want to move forward with you, but only if we're really together. Not just because we're scared of being apart. I don't want you to feel like you're stuck with me, Ryan. If you can't love me the way you used to, I need you to be honest about it. That was the thing about Sarah. She always thought she knew what was best, even when she didn't. She wasn't just asking for a chance. She was demanding it. Demanding I believe in something that felt so fragile, so out of reach. I don't know if I can love you the way I used to, Sarah, I said, the words sounding more final than I wanted them to. I don't know if I can trust you again. Her breath hitched, and I could hear the pain in her voice when she replied, I don't know if I can trust myself either, but I'm willing to try. Are you? I stayed quiet for a long time, turning her words over in my mind. There was so much I wanted to say, so much that had been building up for weeks, but it all felt like too much to put into words. I was tired of hurting, tired of the confusion. But more than that, I was tired of pretending that there was some easy fix. I wasn't sure if Sarah and I could come back from this, but at that moment, I was certain of one thing. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. I need time, I said finally. I need time to figure out what I want. And I think you need that too. We need to stop pretending we have the answers. We need to be honest with ourselves before we can be honest with each other. I can do that, she whispered. I'll wait for you. But I don't want to wait forever, Ryan. You have to promise me that you'll figure this out. You can't just leave me hanging. I'm not leaving you hanging, I said, though it wasn't a promise I could be sure I could keep. But I can't give you a timeline either. I need space, and I need to think. I need to know what's best for both of us, even if that means letting go. Her voice cracked as she said, okay, but I'm here when you're ready. And with that, the conversation ended. We didn't hang up angrily or tearfully. There was a kind of reluctant understanding between us. Neither of us was ready to give up, but neither of us was ready to fully commit to anything either. We both needed space to figure out if the past was worth saving, or if we were better off cutting our losses and moving forward separately. It was terrifying to face that kind of uncertainty, but I knew it was the only way to move forward. So, for the first time in a long time, I gave myself permission to be uncertain. I stopped pretending to have all the answers. And maybe that was the first step toward finding out what I really wanted. Or maybe it was the beginning of realizing that sometimes the hardest decision is the one to let go. The days after that conversation with Sarah were some of the strangest I'd ever experienced. I felt like I was stuck in limbo, neither moving forward nor going back. On one hand, there was a sense of relief in finally admitting that I didn't have all the answers, that it was okay to need time. But on the other hand, there was this gnawing fear that I was wasting precious moments of my life trying to figure out something that might already be over. I threw myself into distractions, hoping they'd help clear my head. Work was a welcome escape, even if it felt hollow. I spent more time with friends, saying yes to drinks, games, and conversations that didn't require me to think too deeply. But no matter what I did, the uncertainty lingered. It was like Sarah's voice still echoed in the back of my mind, asking the same question over and over. Are we really done? One night, while scrolling aimlessly through my phone, I got a message from Emily, a friend I hadn't spoken to in years. We'd been close once, back in college, but life had taken us in different directions. Her message was casual, a "Hey, have you been?" kind of thing, but it caught me off guard. I wasn't sure what made her reach out after so long, but part of me was glad she did. I needed something, anything, to pull me out of the loop I'd been stuck in. We started talking, first through texts, then over the phone. Emily had always been easy to talk to. No pretense, no drama, just real conversations. She didn't push me to open up, but when I did mention that I was going through a rough time, she listened without judgment. It felt good to talk to someone who wasn't connected to Sarah or the mess of my current life. With Emily, I didn't have to explain myself or defend my feelings. I could just be. After a few weeks of catching up, Emily suggested meeting for coffee. I hesitated at first. It felt too soon to let someone else into my life, even as a friend. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized how much I needed that sense of normalcy. Something to remind me that life didn't begin and end with Sarah. So, I said yes. When I walked into the coffee shop, Emily was already there, sitting by the window with her hands wrapped around a mug. She looked different than I remembered, older, wiser, but still with that warm, easy smile that had always put me at ease. When she saw me, she waved. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel weighed down by everything that had been dragging me under. We talked for hours, about everything and nothing. She told me about her job, her travels, the people she'd met along the way. I told her about work, about how I was trying to figure out what came next. I didn't mention Sarah, not yet. It didn't feel right to bring that part of my life into this conversation. I wanted to keep it separate, to leave it outside for just a little while longer. At one point, Emily asked, "So, what's been the hardest thing for you lately?" The question caught me off guard, but not in a bad way. It was direct, but not invasive. She wasn't prying. She just wanted to understand. I thought about it for a moment before answering. Honestly, trying to figure out who I am outside of my relationship. It's like I spent so much time being part of a couple that I forgot how to be just me. And now that I have the chance to figure it out, I don't know where to start. Emily nodded, her expression thoughtful. That makes sense. It's easy to lose yourself in someone else, especially when you care about them. But maybe this is your chance to rebuild, to find the pieces of yourself that got lost along the way. Her words hit me harder than I expected. I'd heard similar things before, but coming from Emily, they felt different, less like advice and more like an invitation. I wasn't sure if I was ready to start rebuilding yet, but for the first time, I thought maybe it wasn't such a bad idea. We parted ways that evening with a promise to meet up again soon. As I walked back to my car, I felt lighter, like a small part of the weight I'd been carrying had been lifted. Emily didn't fix anything, but she reminded me that there was more to life than the cycle I'd been stuck in. Over the next few weeks, I found myself thinking about her more and more. It wasn't romantic, not yet anyway. It was more about the way she made me feel grounded, like I wasn't just floating aimlessly anymore. She was steady, present, and completely different from the whirlwind that had been my relationship with Sarah. But Sarah wasn't out of the picture yet. She'd kept her distance, respecting the space I'd asked for, but there were still occasional texts, short, tentative messages asking how I was doing or if I needed anything. I never ignored them, but I kept my responses brief. I didn't want to give her false hope, but I also didn't want to cut her out entirely. It was a fine line to walk, and I wasn't sure how long I could keep balancing on it. Then one day, out of nowhere, Sarah called. I almost didn't pick up, but something made me press the button. "Hey," I said, my voice neutral. "Hey," she replied. There was a pause, and then she added, "I just wanted to check in. I know we said we'd take time, but I miss you, Ryan. I miss us." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I didn't know what to say. Part of me missed her too. Missed the version of us that had existed before everything fell apart. But another part of me knew that going back wasn't an option. Not really. "I don't know what to say, Sarah," I admitted. "I'm still figuring things out. I'm still trying to figure me out." "I get that," she said quietly, "but I need to know if there's still a chance for us. I can't keep waiting forever, Ryan." The desperation in her voice was palpable, and it hurt to hear. But I knew I couldn't give her the answer she wanted. "Not yet." "I don't know," I said honestly. "I wish I could tell you yes, but I can't. Not right now." There was a long silence on the other end, and I could almost hear her holding back tears. Finally, she said, "Okay, I understand. Just, please don't shut me out completely." "I won't," I promised, even though I wasn't sure if I could keep that promise. When the call ended, I felt drained, like all the progress I'd made in the past few weeks had been undone in an instant. I didn't know how to reconcile the part of me that still cared about Sarah with the part of me that knew we might be better off apart. That night, as I sat alone in my apartment, I thought about everything. Sarah, Emily, the person I was trying to become. And for the first time, I realized that maybe this wasn't about choosing between the past and the future. Maybe it was about choosing myself, about figuring out what I wanted and who I wanted to be without letting anyone else dictate the answer. It wasn't a resolution, not yet, but it was a start. And for now, that was enough. A few weeks passed, and life had started to settle into a strange rhythm. I spent time with Emily more often, not in any official sense, but enough that I noticed the way she brought a sense of clarity to my messy world. She didn't push or prod, and she never tried to be anything more than what I needed in the moment, a steady presence. With Sarah, things remained distant. The texts had become less frequent, the calls almost non-existent. I hadn't heard from her in over a week, and I wasn't sure if that was a good sign or just the calm before the storm. Then one evening, everything came to a head. I was on my way home from work when Sarah called. The ringtone caught me off guard. I had almost forgotten the sound I'd assigned to her name. I debated letting it go to voicemail, but something in me said I needed to answer. "Hey," I said, bracing myself. "Ryan," she began, her voice rushed and tight. "I need to talk to you. Can we meet? Tonight?" I sighed, gripping the steering wheel. "Sarah, we've talked about this. I don't think—" "Please," she interrupted. "It's important." Her tone stopped me. It wasn't desperate or pleading. It was firm, resolute, like she'd made a decision and wasn't going to let it go. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at the same cafe where we'd had one of our first real dates, back when things had been simple and untainted. The nostalgia was sharp, almost painful. When I walked in, Sarah was already there, sitting in the corner with her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. She looked up when she saw me, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of the woman I had fallen in love with years ago. "Thanks for coming," she said as I sat down. Her voice was steady, but her eyes gave her away. She was nervous. "What's this about, Sarah?" I asked, keeping my tone even. She took a deep breath, her fingers tightening around the mug. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she said. "About us. About everything. And I realized I've been holding on to something that isn't there anymore." Her words hit me like a sudden gust of wind. I wasn't sure if I was relieved or devastated. "What do you mean?" I asked cautiously. "I mean," she continued, her eyes locking with mine, "I've been fighting for us because I was scared. Scared of being alone. Scared of admitting that I messed up. But the truth is, Ryan, I don't think we can fix this. I think we've both known that for a while." I sat back in my chair, stunned. For months, I had been the one questioning whether we could come back from everything, and now she was the one saying it out loud. It felt surreal, like the ground was shifting beneath me. "Why now?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. "Because I saw it in your eyes the last time we talked," she said. "You're not here anymore. And I don't blame you. I've been selfish, holding on to you when I should have let you go. I think it's time we stop hurting each other." For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. Her words weren't easy to hear, but they were honest. There was no manipulation, no hidden agenda, just the truth. "You're right," I said after a moment. "We've been holding on to something that's not there anymore. And I don't think either of us realized how much it's been weighing us down." She nodded, a single tear slipping down her cheek. "I'll always care about you, Ryan, but I think it's time we let go." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. There was a strange kind of peace in the silence that followed. For the first time in a long time, it felt like we were on the same page. No more fighting, no more second-guessing, just acceptance. We talked for a little while longer, reminiscing about the good times, acknowledging the bad, and saying the things we had been too afraid to say before. By the time we left the cafe, I felt lighter, like I had finally put down a weight I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. When I got home, I sat on the couch for a long time, letting everything sink in. I thought I would feel empty or sad, but I didn't. I felt free. It wasn't about Sarah anymore. It was about me. About finally letting myself move forward without looking back. That weekend, I met up with Emily again. We went to a park, just walking and talking like we always did. There was nothing forced about it, no expectations or pressure, just two people enjoying each other's company. At one point, she stopped and turned to me, her expression curious. "You seem different today," she said. I smiled, realizing she was right. "I feel different," I replied. "For the first time in a long time, I think I know where I'm headed." Emily didn't push for details. She just smiled back, and we kept walking. It wasn't a grand moment or some dramatic turning point, but it felt significant in its simplicity. Sometimes, the biggest changes come quietly. Sometimes, letting go isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of something better.